Hello, everyone. Welcome to Organic World Building Live Q&A for Week 9. All right, let's jump into it. Okay, everyone, we are here pretty much near the very end of the course. Very exciting, Week 9. Everyone's getting their scenes really kind of coming together. The lighting glue is starting to kind of help congeal all of your scenes to kind of really help bring out all the details that you've been building.
This is Joseph.
So that's really great to see.
Back to another
of course, with it being Week 9, it means we only have one more week of assignment turn-ins as well as one last week for a live Q&A. So make sure for Week 10 you get as much as you can in for your final assignment. I mentioned it in everyone's homework, but of course,
I want to wrap it around
whatever you are looking for in terms of feedback on your scene that you feel will help you progress as an artist going forward on this project as well as future projects, let me know so we can get that kind of feedback in there, as it will be your last chance to get any kind of personal video feedback. Of course, after the class, you can always email me at the same CGMA email. This one's really beneficial because I don't get a whole bunch of spam junk email from
after it loads in.
Other things like just on my normal email. Whereas this, it limits it so that I can definitely see any email updates from my students. And over the time I've been teaching here, I've had multiple students either submit things a few weeks, months, and even a year after the class kind of wrapped up, where they were like, hey, I had more time to kind of work on my scene. I progressed a little bit more.
What I can do if I want to wrap that specific
always willing and open to see that. Definitely really want to see where all of you take these scenes. If you don't get it to the point where you're extremely happy with it and you're like, all right, I'm ready to kind of call it completely done.
After this is loaded inside,
it is one of the hardest things to do, is kind of be able to get to that point where you're like, all right, cool, I'm done with my environment and I'm just going to move on. But eventually we all have to do that. But, this is a 10-week class. And, as I said, from even week 1, building an environment in 10 weeks is quite a tall order. So don't feel discouraged at all if you were not able to kind of get everything ready and done. Hopefully the lessons that you've learned over these 10 weeks will help you going forward in the environments that you're going to be building in the future, where you might have a little bit more time. You might not have to deal with, say, like work or family life, and you kind of just put in a little bit more extra time or get in a few more extra weeks to build out your environment. All right. Also, of course, week 10 is going to be our final live Q&A week. So that's the best time to get in any of those final questions as well that you really just want to hear about. They don't have to be even related to the class at all. They can just be general industry things. They can be about workflows at Naughty Dog. They can just be, general questions that you're kind of curious about that are related in the art field at all. Always happy to answer any of those questions and try to kind of give you all as much information on the industry and that can help you either get your first job in the industry or, where you're trying to make that jump from one job to another. Anything that I can do to help you out there, anything that you're kind of curious about or just want to know, make sure you get those questions in. Obviously, we didn't have any questions for the Q&A this week. Next week, again, will be our last one. So make sure you get those in if you do have any. If not, then I'll just pretty much ramble on about things about the industry, things that I hope you all kind of look towards in building your portfolios in the future, and just things that hopefully will help you out down the road. So just in case you don't have any questions, I've got a lot to hopefully dispense in terms of knowledge for you all to help you out there. All right, so week 9 here was all about lighting, kind of getting our scenes really started to wrap up a lot of the world building and starting to kind of add in those details that really make your scene go from just an environment that, has a few assets and a few props and things like that, just kind of building it up and adding in that really nice atmosphere and mood into your scene that can help it push it to that next level. When you're adding in all these really cool elements like lighting, like atmospherics, like fog, or fire, or anything like that, anything that you're trying to add in those little bits of extra life to your scene, they really help add in that sense of realism. Because if you just have a scene and it's got a single light in it and you're like, okay, it's a sunny day, most photographers, when they're doing photography, always try to shy away from kind of just high noon types of days because they don't produce the most interesting or appealing looking kind of like landscape shots or just any type of photography at all. Ryan, you said your audio is not working. Can you not hear me? Can you try backing out real quick? I'm not sure if it's mine. My microphone is showing that it's like recording audio fine. Always one of the issues with these is that I can never actually hear if it is being recorded. So hopefully all information is recorded. If not, we'll have a way to work around that. But as I was saying, lighting is pretty much when photographers are taking like photography, landscape photography, trying to get interesting photos, they always are going around, or oftentimes going around what they call the golden hour. It's obviously when the sun is setting, when there's a lot of kind of mood in an environment, and you're getting a lot of play with light and shadow. And so that's one thing you want to definitely try to aim for, is try to get some dynamic lighting situation in your scene. Again, you don't have to kind of go out of your way to make some crazy lighting, as lighting is its own essentially course and its own thing to master. But the stronger your lighting or the stronger your atmosphere is for your scene, of course, that's going to make your environment look a lot nicer. Let me just check. Ryan, can you hear me now? The struggle with technology sometimes. Let's just check some of these settings to make sure everything's working. All right, so the microphone's all set up. All right, testing. Very odd. Not sure why. Is everything on my end is showing up fine. Let's see, recording audio. Yes. Little microphone symbol showing up fine as well. Let's just check some other settings just in case. Test on the microphone. Yeah, so it seems like everything's fine. All right. Well, we will just continue. Unfortunate hiccup there. Lighting, yes, obviously it is a big part of your scenes. However, it doesn't have to kind of really make or break your environments. Now, there are other ways you can add some nice mood and atmosphere to your environments. Obviously, we went over fog and things like post-processing, but another great thing is just even some small things are things like environmental clouds that can be added into the background. Now, this doesn't always lay on the environment artist's shoulders. However, oftentimes it can be. Sometimes things like the particle fog that we have here in these mountains to try and add some extra depth to this scene. At Naughty Dog, they were added by our FX artists. However, you have to work with your FX artists and everything, as you will be managing these environments yourself. And so figuring out where to kind of place them to add in that depth can be really kind of key. As they might be building all the particle effects to build for your environment. However, sometimes you might have to place them yourself. But with just some simple cards, you can really get a lot of really nice kind of depth and atmosphere in this scene. Without the particle fog clouds here in the background, these mountains would definitely feel a lot flat. They're a lot more flat than they do now, where they feel like they have a nice bit of depth. You're able to see this kind of rolling mist rolling in through the spires of these jagged, spiky rocks kind of popping up. So it's adding a lot of nice layers. And what it also is doing is helping push some of these mountains a little bit further back. And that's what's helping create that depth. It's pulling some mountains forward where it's making them appear as if they're closer to you. And then when you can see fog going behind a mountain, you're like, oh, I can see that, there must be some space behind there, and that we're getting a lot of nice depth from that. So adding simple things like fog volumes and little particle clouds can be a great way to add in a lot of that depth and just dimension to your scene. Super simple, and we'll just quickly go over how you can add those to your environment without too much work. Good to hear, Ryan, that you're able to get the correct audio output on your speakers. Yes, sometimes Zoom also changes mine from just like the speakers on my computer to just like my microphone playing the sound of my computer. So it can be a little odd. All right, so how we can kind of get some nice little atmospheric particle clouds for our environment in an easy way is actually just in Unreal. So you can just close your landscape or your environment that you're working on. And once again, we're gonna come to the Learn tab. Again, the Learn tab just has so many great things that you can really kind of steal a lot of little tools from. One of the ones I highly suggest is the content examples. It's got a lot of great tools and kind of shader techniques that you can really take a look at. But pretty much anything Unreal has here. If you're more curious about how to kind of just delve deeper into Unreal and figure things out and kind of add some of their cool techniques, a lot of these are really great. Again, the particle effects one can be great as well. Some of these particles might be a little expensive, but always a great one to really check out, especially if you want any kind of fire and things like that. However, if you want something super simple and super easy to kind of just get some nice fog or just some God rays into your scene, if you come down to the page that says Blueprints, it's a great little introduction into how to use blueprints and how blueprints are really built. Blueprints, in case you don't know, are really great tools and kind of modular ways to build specific assets. Now, we're not going to go into blueprints on how to actually build one, as they are pretty complex and they do require, math and things like that, and an entire new way of kind of building things in a kind of a technical way. But just downloading the blueprints little Learn tab, Learn project, we can actually take some of the elements like these God rays, like this particle fog here in the background, and add it to our environments really easily. So once you just kind of add it to your into your library, you can just kind of come in here and you'll just need to create a project. It'll kind of show up down here. You just click create project and it'll, kind of bring up the editor, and then it'll just take maybe like a minute or two to compile the shaders until you get this nice little environment here that you, of course, can kind of run around in. And there's lots of little triggers in this environment, everything kind of working off blueprints. We have this camera here that when you're playing in the game and you kind of go across it, the camera kind of looks at you. So those are always cool little things. And it'll like sound an alarm, I believe. Let's see, oh no, you'd have to run it all the way over there. But basically, you can kind of check out a lot of those things. It also has a lot of cool little things like, little bits of grass here. That you can kind of check out if you're interested in this, kind of crazy, super dense, thing of grass that Unreal made, where it's basically just a whole bunch of, small little triangles, kind of adding to the scene. Of course, for our big landscape environments, this would be kind of very unrealistic as it is extremely dense and extremely polygon heavy. But if you had, like an environment like this, where you have something that is really small and you're only using it kind of once, and you can easily have it fade out and disappear, then you can really get a lot of nice detail. That's why obviously like games that are very corridor focused can be really beneficial for artists, as they can really put all the bells and whistles onto things. They can add in a lot more detail. When you are working with a landscape in a big open organic environment, eventually you're going to start to realize that you're kind of limited in the things you can do, and you'll have to start optimizing and kind of just worrying about performance. So kind of working on bigger open landscapes is always a more difficult task. However, it can be very rewarding, because then you have this big expansive environment that you can show off. You can get a lot of different views for your environments, and everything can look really pretty. All right, so now on to the particle clouds. So not exactly sure how well this is probably going to show off on the stream, as again, I understand that the stream might not be the highest quality, but I think it's pretty good. But if we can see here, we've got these God rays coming in from this window, and we have this little fog particle cloud here that we can move up and down. And when you get closer to it, it actually nicely dissipates and disappears. So it's kind of as if you're moving into the cloud. When you're back here, it's a little bit thicker. It's giving a lot of that nice atmosphere that there's some fog back here. But of course, when you are in a patch of fog, it might just be normally foggy, and you'd still be able to see things. You wouldn't just see the actual card. Another thing about these blueprints is that you can kind of rotate around them. So if we look at these God rays here, every time I'm moving the camera, it's essentially always facing me. That way we're always getting the nice God ray effect in the environment, pretty much any way we look, So these are two really great ones that you can use for your environments. And you can just easily steal them, and we'll just go over that right now. So you'll want to just open up the content browser, and it might be set to like the topmost folder. And what you want to do is you want to just jump to the blueprints tab and then find the two blueprints. Now you of course can, go into the side here and kind of just edit the blueprint or grab any of that information. However, of course, we know that this is the God ray or the light beam. So there's only really two blueprints here that we really need to deal with. So we can easily find them out of all the other things in this blueprint example. But of course, you can open these up and kind of look at them if you so desire. So like here's the blueprint. Obviously, this is a whole nother thing you can learn on how to create different elements and different assets for your scene. But we're just going to be kind of stealing these blueprints. So what you'll want to do is you'll just want to right click on any of the elements that you want to take, any of the blueprints you want to kind of bring into your scene. So obviously we want to bring this fog sheet and this light beam. So we'll just, go with the fog sheet here. And what we'll want to do is we'll want to go to Asset Actions. We'll want to go down to the Move area, and we'll want to migrate it to our own project scene. So we're basically going to be taking it from this scene, and then it's basically going to be migrating over to ours. And it's going to ask if you want to save the level that you're in. You can or can't, doesn't matter. It'll still bring you up an asset report, which will show you everything that the migration is going to bring. Now, the thing with when you're migrating assets, it's not going to bring everything from the content browser, just what you have selected and anything tied to that object. So we see that we have the blueprint. It's taking the actual blueprint fog. It's bringing in all the materials that are needed for that, all the meshes and the textures. We'll click OK, and then we can just migrate to our Unreal project. And depending on where your Unreal project is, you'll want to just save it in the content folder. Now, I'm actually not sure where I saved my environment off the top of my head right now. It's been a while. I can't actually tell if this is the folder where that environment lives, which obviously is not a good thing. You always want to make sure you know kind of where your Unreal projects are. All right, so I think this might be it. CGMA, there we go. All right. Another reason why you're saving your projects, make sure you always save them in the kind of same spots every time. This was just an unfortunate moving of upgrading computers, and then I started moving things around. But I can just go into my new landscape folder. I can go into the content folder, and then you just want to select that, and then it'll say, well, it's just giving me this message that, the migrate, I already did the migration a little bit earlier, and it's asking if I want to overwrite it. You can do yes or no to all, and then it'll have this little pop-up here, and it'll say migration successful. Now, when you open up your full environment, you'll have those blueprints and all the textures and everything that comes with it in your scene. It'll be just in your content browser. So you can just open that up and start placing it around your environment. So if we just open up the content browser, we should have a blueprints folder in here. It'll be under assets, blueprints, and then we can see we have our fog sheet. And it'll make kind of folders for everything. Now, this is the only unfortunate part is if, depending on how you set your kind of folder structure up, Unreal always puts all of their textures, their materials, and their meshes under assets. And if you just kind of created a top level folder and then put your materials, your meshes, it's not going to move them in there. And I can't remember off the top of my head if moving them from folder to folder, like if you move this into your regular texture folder, if that will do anything. So I would just be careful and maybe just kind of leave any of those things. But now you have this blueprint in your scene, so you can kind of mess around with it and add it into the background to give yourself some nice kind of cool fog effects. Now, another way you can kind of go about doing this, if you don't want to use a blueprint, you don't want to maybe messy up your scene, is really just kind of creating a flat card texture that can act as a kind of cloud that you can kind of place in the background of your scene. And so, those are super simple. You can just kind of Google cloud mask texture, maybe. You might have to make these your own, but you can always find some cool clouds that have been kind of rendered out, and just use stuff like this as kind of essentially, you're just placing this on it's a black and white image, you're putting it on a card, and you're using this as kind of a cloud. So you'll of course need to make sure that you use this as your mask in your material. And then you basically have a nice little cloud here that you can kind of place around as just a kind of card that is always pointing out wherever your kind of main view is. And then you'll have that kind of nice little card. We use that kind of trick to just add in a lot of cool detail in the super far wide sections of environments, things that are really kind of far away, as long as they are on just a card, like a single card, and they're, kind of facing the camera. That's all you really need. We do that all the time with like a lot of trees to kind of fake the effect that we have a lot more trees in a scene without actually having to model them out. So for example, like the players probably like can walk into this doorway of this little building right here. And if we see up here on this kind of ridge line, instead of it just being this rock that was kind of, just a rock and everything, right here we just have these little cards that are facing inwards into the environment, and they just have some trees on them, just some trees rendered out, nothing too crazy, super simple, but it can add a lot of extra depth to your environment. Let's see if there's any other clear examples. So on this mountain range here, we are doing the exact same thing where all of these trees that you see on the top of this giant kind of cliff rock mountain, again, a player is smaller than, they can just fit into this area. These are just really big cards, and we don't need to have a full modeled out tree all the way back there, especially with how far away it is in the distance. So you can just use a nice little card, be it trees or, maybe some of these clouds and everything, just to give that appearance that your environment is a lot bigger. And again, these nice little particle clouds that we have going on in here, they're adding just more depth to the environment. It feels like, okay, there's different layers to the scene because I can see where that fog is. I can see it kind of around and spread out in the environment. So always a big fan of being able to use that, Not every environment needs fog though. So just kind of use it sparingly, use it where you need to, but also think about utilizing just single 2D textures on a flat single polygon to kind of add a lot of extra details like these trees into the background. Now, of course, the only issue with those is that when you are doing something like this, just a single plane with a texture on it, the lighting won't change if you do change your lighting. So generally we have to bake in the lighting into those textures right away. So if we have trees and we kind of want kind of a sunset feel to them, oftentimes if you just leave them pure green and you don't kind of add a little bit of extra warmth to them, then they might start to feel a little too cool in terms of their color. So sometimes for these farther away trees, we'll have to kind of adjust the textures a little bit to make sure that they don't stand out too much, as we want them just to be that extra little bit of detail in the environment to make the entire environment feel large, feel impressive, feel like it has a lot of organic nature to it, but without it actually drawing attention and being like, oh, this is exactly what I should be looking at. We just want it as that extra subtle little pop of detail. Again, here's another shot with a bunch of those kind of particle clouds kind of just throughout the environment, just kind of adding in all of that extra dimension to it. Getting a lot of the fog in one section, like over here, makes all of these mountains stand out a lot more than if they were, just pretty much flat and all at the same kind of focal depth. Now, another thing that you can do to help boost your portfolio's kind of presence and show your ability to adapt your environment to a lot of different kind of conditions is actually having multiple different kind of lighting solutions or scenarios in your portfolio. You don't have to do kind of like 3 or a whole bunch or go crazy with it, but having different lighting setups where you can kind of render out maybe a kind of a rainy day type of scene or a kind of sunny day. Maybe it's heavily foggy, or maybe it's even just at night and you have your main shots all in the day, but then you have one shot that's at night. That can add a lot to the power of how strong your portfolio is going to be. You're showing that your environment doesn't just work in the one lighting condition you have, it can work in multiple lighting conditions. So this is just kind of some screenshots from Battlefield 1, just kind of showing off the different elemental effects that kind of go on in the environment, how dynamic the scene can really be. So obviously we have this kind of bombed out, rainy version of the same scene. We have, the nice, pretty sunny day with a bunch of thick, puffy clouds in the sky. Not a lot of kind of crazy atmosphere or mood in this, but it's still obviously, it shows off everything really nicely. And so that is always the balance, is like both the left and right screenshots don't show off potentially your texture work as well, but they add a lot of really nice mood. So if you want a scene, or if you want to have a screenshot in your portfolio that has a lot of really cool mood and kind of shows your artistic flair, doing something like this where you have multiple lighting conditions can be a really big benefit for that. And of course, this is the super foggy, fogged over environment. Obviously, I would probably not put this one into your portfolio as it's really not showing off much, but it is kind of an option you can go with if you're trying to get some kind of different moods. And then just some, kind of close-ups. See, we're getting a lot of this rain effect in here. A lot of the heavy storms got a lot of really nice atmosphere, but a lot of the texture work and detail and just kind of detail of assets we can't really see because a lot of the rain is kind of overtaking that. But then, of course, in the sunny version, all right, it's not as kind of moody. It doesn't have a kind of crazy like, ooh, wow, this is super eye-catching because, this feels like it's a bombed out, rainy, bleak time in war, whereas this feels like it's just kind of a normal, happy, sunny day. However, we can see all the beautiful texture work that is done here in the terrain, getting these kind of dirt trails kind of really built in there, just the nice normal read on all these grass assets, and then just all like how nice all the trees and foliage look, and then of course all the blending here with the grass and the dirt and just the patches of sand. So this shows it off really well. And then, of course, we have like the super, I guess, moody one where it's like you're in the midst of fog and everything. But having something like this can really benefit your portfolio. I probably, again, wouldn't do something like this, as I think it's not really showing off much. However, if you have like two screenshots with two different moods in there, it can work really well for your portfolio. I would probably pick one lighting condition to be your main one, whatever it is that you're going to show off a lot of your screenshots. Probably the one that you want to be able to show off that shows a lot of your detail, and then have maybe one that has kind of a crazy mood to it. It can just extend the life and just the value of your portfolio. So one of my previous students, Leonide, did just that. He had this really nice forest environment that he built out here. And, once the class wrapped up, he was able to kind of go back into his scene and kind of add in a night version of the same exact scene. And so he kind of was able to come up with this, which was his more, kind of night setting. He didn't have to change anything else in the scene. He's not kind of adding in things to just make it a night scene. He's really just changing the lighting. He still even kind of had his, it might be really hard to see, but, subtly you can still see the God rays in there, or I guess probably they would be moon rays, but you can even still see the particle fog back here. So everything is basically exactly the same. He just kind of set up two different lighting conditions for his environment. And I think it gives his portfolio just a lot more kind of weight to it. It's showing off that, hey, my environment not only looks great in the normal daytime that I'm showing off, everyone, but it also looks great, at night as well. So that's kind of a really great way to do it. Now, there are two ways you can go about doing something like that. And it really depends on your lighting for your environment, how you're doing things. If you're baking lighting, and you're kind of building out your light maps, and kind of going with like a high or a production kind of quality lighting. Probably would never do production. Is the difference between high and production is relatively low, and high is generally what you want for just any kind of portfolio work. Production is generally what is used for a shipped game. This is the final lighting conditions at all, but it takes dramatically longer than anything else. Everyone, normally whenever you're building lighting, it's set to preview, which is really low, but it's super fast to kind of get lighting in there. You'll notice that once you're starting to bake lighting, builds can take an extreme large amount of time to build all those. So if you're baking lighting, we'll show a solution for that. But if you're just going with the dynamic lighting setup, like right now, none of this is baked, none of it has light maps. So it's not going to have as soft of kind of fall offs on some of the shadows. The lighting might not be as nice. However, to kind of demo off an environment like this and to really just have a lot of flexibilities where I can just be like, oh, I'm going to move this, tent right here. And I don't have to worry about lighting at all. And I don't have to worry about like, oh no, my light maps are now broken. To kind of demo things off and to really build out your environment, it's the best way to go, I feel. But once you get into the phase where you're like, okay, maybe I want to get slightly higher quality from my lighting, then you can go ahead and start building out light maps and turning your light sources here off from dynamic or movable to static or stationary. So all it takes is essentially if you're going with the first method of having a pretty much real runtime light solution where, I can take this light here and I can just kind of move it around and I'm getting a new lighting condition pretty much instantly in my scene. The only thing I have to really change is, of course, my skybox to kind of match the mood of my scene. But just moving this light around, obviously I can get it to be kind of a different look, maybe play around with the color a little bit to, get kind of a different feeling. And then of course, maybe the intensity as well. Not like that. Yeah, it's just as simple as kind of just having your one dynamic light. So you have that in your scene. You're like, cool, it's where I want it. And now I want to have a different lighting condition. All you have to do is go down to rendering and turn off visible. This will basically disable this light, even though it's still in your scene. It's just basically disabled. It's not going to affect anything. And then if you kind of create a secondary light source where you're like, okay, this is going to be my other light source. This is going to be my other kind of mood. All you have to do is make sure this one is now visible. And that way you can kind of have two different lights in your scene without them stacking on top of each other. Because if they're both visible at the same time, then they're both stacking on top of each other and they're messing up your lighting. And if you try and just turn off the little eyeball, it's going to turn off the light, but not really. It's kind of just hiding it temporarily. So if you jump in game or you render out these scenes, it's going to render everything that has even an eyeball turned off. So that is one thing to just be aware of. If you turn the visibility off under rendering visible, it basically means, hey, this light is not affecting my environment at all. And then you can have your second light and you can kind of really come in here and start to mess around with, what kind of scene you're going for, kind of what kind of mood you want to have. The only thing is like the sky sphere, you do have to change this one up. I haven't really found a good way to get this to turn off because it just unfortunately does not have a visibility check mark, which is a shame. So if you are kind of changing things up with the sky sphere and you're like, okay, I want to have two different lighting conditions, you do unfortunately have to kind of change the settings of your sky sphere. So you'll probably want to like attach it to your secondary light. If you're like, okay, now I'm using this as my main light source, then you'd want to come down to your sky sphere and then of course attach it to light source 1 and instead of 2. And this will kind of put it at that kind of more high point here. Of course, then you can, still adjust things for this to kind of get those different moods. And this way you're going to have like multiple different moods in your environment, different kind of scenes. And it can really just easily change the look of your environment pretty quickly and give you, a different feeling. Where you're like, cool, now I've got maybe a more moody scene here. And then of course, if you're like, all right, I'm done with that, I want to just go back to my other lighting condition, you'll of course have to hook up your sky sphere as well again, but now we're back to our original lighting kind of setup. And this can kind of give you the ability to have multiple lighting conditions, kind of render those out and get a lot of really cool looks and effects, much like we have here with these battlefield shots. However, if you are not utilizing kind of the dynamic lighting, where it's set to movable instead of stationary static, which will require a kind of lighting build of your environment, what you can do if you want to have obviously some really nice light maps to get even better lighting than just the dynamic lighting is we can set up the pre-computed lighting scenarios. Now this is just a simple blueprint, and Unreal has this really nice page that just kind of walks you through it, but it's pretty simple. It's pretty much just, it's one connection really. It shows you here how do you just want to like go to, kind of your window, your levels, your lighting scenario, and then you can kind of just change the lighting scenario and kind of just choose how you want to do it. So it's pretty easy, and it gives you this ability to just kind of with a blueprint, just swap between two different lighting setups. So you can have a night scenario where it has all the lighting baked in with this kind of really dark, ambient, moody lighting. And then you can kind of switch to your daylight scenario, which will have a different sky sphere, different lighting, different light maps, all that stuff. And it's really nice and really quick to just kind of switch back and forth between the two. This is, of course, if you do want to have your light maps baked, if you're kind of going that and you want to have those higher quality lighting conditions than something like the fully dynamic light that we have kind of here. Obviously this is going to be the easiest way to kind of get around it and figure out what you want your lighting to be. But of course, you're not going to get as nice of shadows. The lighting quality isn't going to be as nice, but it just has that benefit of, quickly being able to move the lighting around your scene. Now, even if you are doing lighting conditions where you are baking the lighting, I always suggest to set your lights to movable, kind of figure out what exactly you want it to look like, and then be like, okay, maybe I like this. And then you can kind of set it back to static or stationary. That way you can just kind of dial in what you want for your lighting to get it to look like this. And then you can bake it, spend, a few hours baking your level to get in all those pretty lighting effects. And the kind of pre-computed lighting scenarios is a great way to really kind of just do that. And it just easily will run you through everything you need to do for it. It's, a really simple setup. And again, it has a blueprint here for you as well, where you can easily switch back between the times of day if you want. So it's a great one to check out. And if you want a little bit more help on that, Unreal just added it to the Learn tab. So you can kind of come in here and, download this scene, kind of figure out some more stuff here, and just kind of mess around with it. So definitely a good one to kind of check out. Actually, I don't know if you can download the scene. Is it just... Okay, so it just takes you to the wiki. That's a shame. I thought they allowed you to download the environments like the blueprints one we went over a little bit earlier. I guess not. Unfortunate, but still it's a great one. Again, really like all of the Learn stuff here if you want to really dive in deeper into your Unreal kind of showcase things here. And I'll make sure I'll leave this down here on the forums so that you can all have it just in case. Just in case you can't find it on the Learn tab. I'll just set that up later, actually. But yeah, I'll leave that down there for week 9 here. And yeah, so lighting is, can be really simple like that, where you can, kind of go the dynamic way where you're just turning the visibility of your light source on and off to kind of get it to switch. Again, with that, you do have to kind of change your sky sphere, and you'll have to kind of change things up that way. So it's definitely not as kind of easy an approach. However, it can still be a pretty fun one, or a pretty simple and fast one. Whereas if you want to kind of bake things out, it's definitely not too difficult, but you do have to go through the steps of setting it up. And again, I always recommend sticking with the movable lights until you've nailed where you want your light to kind of come from. Kind of be like, okay, cool. I've got, a nice blend of half of my scene is kind of in shadowed, half of my scene is kind of bathed in sunlight. So you're getting this nice kind of split between the two. And, that's really just kind of what we want to see in these environments, is kind of some nice lighting in there. And so splitting it up between the two is really just going to give you that nice balance of, you're like, okay, a bunch of things are draped in light. I can see a lot of details, and then stuff in shadow, it's like kind of hidden in shadow, but you're still getting a lot of those details. You're still getting a lot of really nice pops of kind of silhouette shapes and kind of forms in there. Also, with your lighting, you can really utilize that to reduce a lot of the noise in your environment. Things that are going to be in shadow tend to not be as overtly noisy. A lot of things are going to start to kind of meld together, whereas things in sunlight might start to become a lot more noisy because they're going to be popping out, especially if you have a lot of different materials on there. Things that are kind of metal and shiny are going to be very noisy in kind of direct sunlight because the reflections that they're getting off them. Things in shadowed areas are going to kind of not have that kind of high reflectivity to it. So they're going to start to fall off into just kind of fall off in terms of how noisy they are, and kind of blend off into kind of a nice cohesive whole. And that's kind of the last thing I want to leave you with this week, is kind of talking about noise in your environments. So we're pretty much everyone's trying to scramble to kind of get all their cool details in there. You've made a whole bunch of really nice assets. And one thing that always happens when students are kind of building out their environment and they're like, cool, I'm taking my first pass, is they tend to make their scenes very noisy because they want to have every shot show every bit of detail they made. They are kind of forgetting that, you want to keep areas of assets kind of grouped up, much like we were talking about last week with kind of grouping up large clumps of foliage or large clumps of detail or color. Utilize that kind of going forward in your environments. Make sure that you are trying to reduce the amount of noise and just busyness that is going on in your scene. You definitely don't need to show off kind of everything that's in your environment in one shot where you're like, oh, well, I've got maybe a cool satellite dish that I want up here, but it's starting to become really distracting and really noisy. Maybe I should show it off in a different screenshot where I'm like, okay, I'm over here, and now I can have maybe a big, satellite dish right here because I've got a much more simple environment. It's not as noisy, it's not as distracting. Whereas if you're kind of like here on this kind of far off shot and you're like, oh, cool, I need to have detail like right up next to, maybe the player view right here, but then also I need to have stuff here in the middle. Then maybe I need to have like the trees right here also have something kind of crazy going on. Like there's, a rock slide. And then up here in the background, I want to have like a spaceship crashed in there. That's definitely always a problem, is you're just going to have way too many details competing for attention. You want to make sure that your point of interest, whatever it is, even on a kind of large open shot, is kind of the main focal point of the scene. You can have hints to other things, but you definitely don't want them to kind of distract and pull away from it. You'll want to kind of start to arrange some of your shapes arrange some of your colors and details to kind of mask some of those extra points of interest out a little bit so that your main one can kind of really shine and take kind of center stage. And so it's kind of like, okay, cool. This area right here, this is my focal point. But you know what? If you look a little bit further and you read deeper into the environment, you're like, oh, there's this, giant waterfall in the background. Cool. It just allows you to kind of see other things within the environment once you've already invested in what is the main kind of point of interest you want to show off in your environment. You don't want to just have like, a bunch of teepees all over the place, in this example, because you're like, oh, well, I made one and now I got to have like a whole bunch of them all over this scene. It's going to start to become really noisy, really distracting, and you won't really have much of a focal point to really focus in on. And so that's just going to become really noisy. It's going to be hard for anyone to be like, okay, this is exactly what I'm looking at. This is what I'm focusing on. Just duplicate another one right there. All right, so now we've got like a bunch of these and it's starting to become a little noisy. We're like, okay, we've got them here in the focal point, but now we've got them here, 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 and here. And so there's just so many of them and it starts to become very distracting. So instead of just having them all over the place, be like, okay, well, I really want them here in my foreground. And then I also want to give the idea and the impression that they are, they're even living on these cliffs. So instead of just having them kind of sporadic, choose an area that you're like, okay, I'm going to congregate more of, my second essentially focal point and read into one area instead of a bunch. So you're essentially just being like, okay, cool. I've got this other area in the environment that is kind of showing off that like, hey, there's some teepees over here and they are kind of like living down here in the nice little valley as well as up here maybe in the mountains. It becomes far less noisy and far less distracting. And if you want to have, this one over here that's kind of like a little bit on the outskirts, sometimes even just moving the camera so you kind of obscure it. Oops. You kind of obscure it from the view because you still want it there, possibly for gameplay reasons, but maybe you don't want it in the shot because it's kind of starting to become too distracting. Now we've got, maybe some of these teepees here that are in our environment. They're kind of like, cool, we're seeing them off in maybe some of these higher reach areas, but they're not as distracting. We don't have as many. We're just getting hints of them kind of here on the mountain ridges. They're a little out there on the kind of borders of our environment, and we're still getting the fact that they're here, but they're not taking away from the main attention of our scene right here. It allows it to have that secondary read when you're going back through the image and looking at all the cool details. You're like, oh, cool. They live up here as well, up here on the snowy mountains, as well as this nice little valley floor. So that's just one way you can start to reduce a lot of the noise in your scenes, is to kind of pick out some of those extra points of interest that I know a lot of you have been adding and kind of just sporadically kind of placing within your environment. Try to choose, in any shot you have, just having two kind of areas of interest, really the one that's kind of in the focal point area. And then if you want to still show off things in the background, do that as well. It can also, of course, come from the removal of assets where you're like, okay, maybe I need to just get rid of some of the trees that I have here because maybe I just have, too many trees. And it's becoming noisy and distracting. So I'll just select some of these trees here and I'm like, okay, maybe these trees here. I didn't select all of them. Let's grab all of these trees. And that one. All right. So maybe you're like, now I just want to remove some of these trees because they're just becoming a little too distracting. I want a little less of them. Maybe I just want them kind of as nice accent pieces. Now we're getting more of this look. Oops, don't want to place them back in. Now we're getting more of the look of, okay, we're getting a lot of rocks here in the middle. It's kind of more of this, big rocky valley floor. And then we're just getting some trees maybe here in the valley below. And, maybe we can remove some of these here on the tree, or on the tops of these rocks. And just remove some of those as well. So now we've got this kind of like environment where we're really kind of focusing in on kind of this more rocky valley or rocky mountain feeling to our environment, with just the trees kind of growing here in the small valley. The green valley here is obviously, it's growing because there's a lot of foliage. We have the river here as well. So it's going to get a lot of moisture and a lot of nutrients to kind of grow up and grow these trees, as well as the rocks protect them from the wind and everything so they can grow nicely. But on the rocks themselves, they're full of snow. They don't have as much soil. So it's going to be a lot harder for these trees to kind of grow on those mountaintops. So we dramatically change up this environment, potentially made it, a lot cleaner of a scene read because we removed some of those details from the environment. It wasn't just adding details. Sometimes just kind of removing some of the noise in your scene can really just help out in that regard. So, look at your scenes when you're building them. Think about ways that you can kind of reduce some of the overall visual noise. Again, like I always said, or like I said, I think maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, grab your environment, bring it into take like a photo in Photoshop, and then just kind of zoom out and look at the thumbnail. If it is too hard to understand what's really going on when it's kind of like, cell phone size, then generally that means there's probably too much going on in your environment and it's becoming a little bit too difficult to read. You might need to kind of adjust some of your colors, maybe conform them so that, your greens are all more in the same kind of green color spectrum, or maybe you have a bit more kind of sky in your environment, or maybe there's a bigger breakup between the sky background color and the kind of rock color that you have. So maybe there's more of a contrast there. So that way, when you are kind of zoomed out in this thumbnail view, it kind of reads and makes sense. So that's one of the best ways to really check your environment to see if things are becoming too noisy and too difficult for a viewer to read, is always the kind of zoom out thumbnail view. It's what concept artists and people have been just doing for generations. And I think it's a great way to really figure out if your environment is, kind of too noisy and a little unclear of what a lot of those shapes and forms are. Because, oftentimes, as what we were doing with our rocks, you want to start with your big primary shapes, move down to your secondary, tertiary shapes, and then go all the way down to, then you want to go all the way down to your tertiary shapes, your small ones. So, it's pretty much the same with building out an environment. Make sure that all the big shapes here in this environment work. And once they do, then you can start adding in those little details, those little bits of noise. All right, and with that, we will wrap up this week. Hopefully all of you found that helpful. If there's anything else that you would like to know on how you can add any kind of extra mood or atmosphere to your environment, of course, don't hesitate to ask. Again, week 10 is our final week for any kind of submissions, as well as our final week for our live Q&A and any kind of questions you have. If you have anything related to just Unreal, kind of the industry in general, creating a portfolio, your social media presence, kind of art tests, things like that. These are all things that we'll be going over. So if you have any kind of really pressing questions about that, don't hesitate to ask them. And of course, if there's anything you just are kind of interested in knowing, anything that we do at Naughty Dog, kind of that, might be different from other studios, or, kind of just whatever. If you're curious about my approach to anything else, let me know, and we will kind of go over that for week 10, as it will be the final week for our class here. All right, everyone, thanks for sticking it out this week, and I will see you all next week.